Hello learners, welcome back to the course on learning and development in organization. We move to the next lecture where we will be looking into the diagnostic questionnaires for senior managers. Now in this module we have looked into different aspects of understanding ourselves when you are part of the organization, when we are part of a system where we are actually doing work. This are the evaluation mechanisms that we are typically looking into. So in the first few lectures we looked into that as part of the diagnostic approaches for learning and development. Today specifically we look into the diagnostic questionnaires for senior managers. I am Dr. Cyril Issac. I am an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now when you look into understanding the senior managers, it can be looked in from different dimensions. Dimensions like leadership, dimensions like personality, dimensions like competency. So all these typical aspects will have its own significance. So my approach today is to give it to you some of the existing, validated, most common and most practical scales and evaluation mechanisms in understanding the learning and development process of the senior managers and how they are going to facilitate the same within organization. So we start with today's particular thought. You don't learn to walk by following rules. I hope you understand this. You learn by doing and by falling over. So by practice is what we get to the perfection, and by training is what we succeed in what we are doing. So the competency that we tend to develop in something, it's outcome. It's a part of something which comes up as a consequence to our ever endless effort in rectifying or in doing something or in solving a problem. So this will be the underlying theme for today. Let's start with the diagnostic questionnaires. Why we need a diagnostic questionnaire? The purpose of the diagnostic questionnaire. So diagnostic questionnaires typically help the senior managers to have a insight, understanding about what they are, gain self-awareness about the leadership styles and the effectiveness, what they are, how effectively they are doing their work and how effectively they are able to bring out change in an organization. They also look into the strengths, the development areas, the blind spots that are associated with every single individual. You look into any particular individual within the ambit of the organization, there will be always some blind spot. There will be always some area of improvement. There will be always some strengths associated with that individual. There will be always some weakness also that will be associated with the individual. But that said, when you are looking into any employee working in an organization, we can see that nobody is perfect. We need to understand how we can actually make them at least good enough for the job or fit enough for the job. Another significant aspect is to evaluate team and the organizational performance. Many a time we see that the particular manager is given a team. Now, how effectively the team is performing, we need to have some objective measure associated with this performance, and this is what diagnostic questionnaire actually comes out with. It gives a measure of the organizational performance and it is more driven by data. So it's all about the data driven mechanisms that guides the change. It improves the culture and enhances the strategy execution. So many a time we see that we falter in executing the certain growth strategy because we do not have that growth mindset within the organization. Sometimes we feel that there is a lot of uncertainty avoidance that is happening or that is ingrained with respect to part of the culture, and we are seldom able to make a particular change, or we are not able to bring the required intervention in the organization. So if you ask me, these are some of the purposes, some of the facts, some of the aspects why we need diagnostic questionnaires. We'll look into some of them in a great detailed mode because we always cannot cover the entire exhaustive list because it keeps on developing, getting validated. Some of the most common, most practical, and in fact the most adapted and adopted scales across the research paradigm, I'll try to discuss that. We'll start with the most common and the most popular, the 360-degree feedback. So let's understand this 360-degree feedback tool. Leadership circle profile is what this is also known as. So when you are looking into the 360-degree feedback tool, this tool gathers feedback from multiple sources. It comes from self, it comes from peers, it comes from direct reports, it's supervisors. So it provides a comprehensive view of a manager's behavior and the leadership impact. So you look into the popular tools like the leadership circle profile, you will understand, unlike a typical leadership assessment, a 360-degree leadership assessment gathers feedback from people at all levels in the organization with relevant perspective on the participants' leadership ability. So it could be the bosses, the associates, the peers, and even the direct reports that are available. So they evaluate the participants' leadership skills, attitudes, influence, overall effectiveness, and other key leadership competencies with respect to every single individual. So what we understand is that this leadership circle profile is unique because it is the only 360-degree assessment that measures creative competencies and reactive tendencies, combining the leadership's inner and outer attributes. So the 360-degree assessment, what we are discussing, gives the leader greater insight into how they are perceived, including, let's say, the strengths and the limitations in their current leadership activities and with respect to their leadership effectiveness. So it is widely used for senior leaders and executives. So if you see as an example, you look into the identity, what are you? As a leader, self-awareness is there, authenticity is there, system awareness is there, achieving, controlling, protecting, complying, relating, what type of leader you are. You look into the relationship angle to the creative angle, you will see that, from conservative, caring, protection, collaborator, mentoring, interpersonal intelligence, selfless leader, balance, composure, these are the way it moves in. And you look into task orientation, you will see that somebody is going from courageous, authenticity, community concern, sustainable productivity, systems thinker, strategic focus, achieve results to decisiveness. So this is where typically you move from creative to task. Then towards a reactive angle, you see that people might be driven, ambitious, autocratic, arrogant, and they might be also critical. Then from reactive to again the relationship angle, they might have a certain power distance or passive, belonging, and sometimes pleasing also. These are typically a genuine example of how the 360-degree feedback looks like in terms of a senior management. Now when we look into this particular 360-degree feedback tools, I like to introduce Voices 360 by Korn Ferry. Now Korn Ferry 360 measures a person's competencies in typically 4 areas: how they understand the business and make decisions, how they take initiative and execute, how they collaborate and influence, and how they demonstrate self-awareness and authenticity. So the assessment also measures something like stallers or stoppers, which are considered harmful behaviors detrimental to the leadership performance typically. When we look into the competency part, this typically shows how you demonstrate your competencies to others. Look for any strengths, opportunities for improvement, and potential development needs. So you have, let's say if you are taking this an example in thought process, you have about understanding the business part, business insight, customer focus, having the financial acumen, tech savvy, making complex decisions. You have, in the thought, from managing the complexity to balancing the stakeholders. In creating the new and different, you have the global perspective coming in, cultivating innovation, strategic mindset, etc. In the results part, you have action orientedness and resourcefulness. You have the managing execution part, which is planning, alignment, etc., optimizing the work process. When you look into focusing on performance, you have the result part. When we come to people, it's all about building collaborative relationships, collaborations, managing conflicts, interpersonal savviness, and builds network. All these elements will come under the collaborative relationship. When we have different talent, we have to optimize them. So developing the talent, building effective teams, all these aspects come under optimizing diverse talent. So influencing people, we have again the communication part, how organizational savvy you are, the persuasion, the vision and the purpose, and finally you come to the individual, the self, the courage, the trust factor, how open you are, demonstrating the self-awareness, the self-development part, and how flexible you are in terms of managing ambiguity, nimble learning, and being resilient. So this is a typical example which gives you a certain level of insight into how we actually have a result of a feedback tool specifically. So when you are looking into leadership practices inventory, another typical model which equips you to measure the leadership potential, it measures 5 core leadership behaviors. If I can put it like this, one is model the way, second is inspire a shared vision, third is challenge the process, fourth is enable others to act, and finally the fifth one is encourage the heart. So these are the typical 5 elements that will come as core factors under LPI, that is leadership practices inventory. And when we look into this, it includes both the self and the observer assessment. So this is a combination of both, and typically it is research based and used in leadership development programs globally. So the leadership practices inventory instrument is an essential tool to help you gain the perspective into how you see yourself as a leader and what actions you can take to improve your use of 5 practices which research has demonstrated year after year to make more effective leaders. Now, when we look into the different types of assessment, as I already mentioned in the beginning, we also have some understanding with respect to personality and behavioral aspects also. So this understanding will get through personality and behavioral style assessment. So one of the most common tool that we make use of in terms of the senior management is the DISC factor, that is dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. So when you look into these styles, typically you'll see that in case of dominance, the key traits are being direct, decisive, and results oriented. So what would be the focus? The focus would be inevitably achieving goals and overcoming the obstacles part. When we look into the style, influence, it is more about being outgoing, more about being persuasive and social. And the key traits would focus on building relationships and influencing others. Look into the steadiness, it's all about being calm, being loyal and dependable. And the focus here would be definitely stability, consistency and cooperation. And when we look into the 4th style of the DISC platform or the DISC assessment tool, conscientiousness, the key traits include being analytical, detail-oriented and precise, and typically the focus would be quality, accuracy and structure. So this is yet another important assessment tool which we use to assess the personality and behavioral style. We now look into a detailed understanding. We now go more deeper into the DISC way of understanding the personality and behavioral style. We start with dominance. When we talk about dominance, it is more about direct, being result oriented, firm and strong-willed and forceful. Whereas you look into the influence part, as I mentioned, outgoing, enthusiastic, being optimistic, high-spirited, lively will come under the influence domain. In case of steadiness, even-tempered, accommodating, patient, humble, tactful, and finally conscientiousness, being analytical, being reserved, precise, private and systematic. So this is what we see in the DISC type assessment, that is dominance, influence, steadiness and conscientiousness type of assessment. Now, one of the most significant and the most popular type of inventory that is there with respect to personality is the Myers-Briggs personality types. So, let's look into the MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator. So, known basically as MBTI commonly is based on the Jungian theory. It categorizes personality into 16 types. So, basically you see this, the categorization which is useful for self-awareness, for communication and team building. It should not be used for hiring or labeling. So, please note, it does not measure skill or performance, it measures just the preference. So, when you look into the MBTI or the Myers-Briggs personality types specifically, you have extroverts who are energized people who enjoy a variety of tasks. Maybe they like quick pace and are good at multitasking. Look around you, look at the people you know, introspect within yourself what you are. Look into all the stakeholders you engage with on a day-to-day basis, you will see all these types existing. Another significant type within the MBTI is the introvert. Often like working alone or in small groups, they prefer a more deliberate pace and they like to focus on one task at a time. Then you have the sensors. Sensors are realistic people who like to focus on the facts and details, and they apply common sense and past experience to come up with practical solutions to the problem. And you have intuitives. They prefer to focus on possibilities and big picture. They easily see patterns, they see value, they see typically innovation as a creative value and seek creative solutions to problems. We also have thinkers and feelers, thinkers who tend to make decisions using logical analysis, objectively weighing the pros and the cons, and effectively they value honesty, they value consistency and they value fairness. Whereas when we look into feelers, they tend to be sensitive and cooperative and decide based on their own personal values and how others will be affected by their actions. We have judges and perceivers on the other hand, judges who tend to be organized and prepared, like to make and stick to plans that they have made and are comfortable following most rules. You also have perceivers who prefer to keep their options open, like to be able to act spontaneously and like to be flexible with making plans. Now let's look into another type of assessment, which is the Hogan assessment. Hogan assessment, the tool would be HPI, Hogan Personality Inventory. Hogan Personality Inventory assesses the day-to-day personality, how someone typically behaves in work setting. That is why the day-to-day personality. Then you have the Hogan Development Survey, HDS. They identify derailers, personality traits that emerge under stress or pressure. Then we have MVPI, that is Motives, Values, Preferences Inventory, and this measures the core values and drivers that impact cultural fit and engagement. So, these are the typical Hogan assessment tools that are practically used in case of personality and behavioral style assessment. Now, let us look into the FIRO-B. FIRO-B, that is FIRO-B, Fundamental Interpersonal Relations Orientation Behavior, was developed by psychologist Schutz. It focuses on interpersonal needs and how they affect the way individuals relate to others, particularly in group or leadership settings. So, it measures 3 interpersonal needs in specifically 2 dimensions, that is expressed and wanted. You look into the inclusion, let's say, do I include others? That would be the fundamental question in expressed. Whereas, do I want to be included? That is a fundamental question in case of wanted. When you talk about control, do I assert authority? That's the fundamental question for expressed. Do I want others to lead? That's a fundamental question for wanted. Where you talk about affection, When you talk about affection, do I express closeness is the typical question for expressed, and for wanted the question would be, do I want closeness from others? That is typically what you see in case of the Furubi. Now let's look into the emotional intelligence EQ assessment. The first and the foremost and the most popular one is the EQI 2.0, which provides you with a detailed assessment of your areas of strength and potential areas for development. So, emotional intelligence, there is no doubt, if I make a statement, is a critical leadership skill involving self-awareness, involving empathy and relationship management. So, when you actually decipher this EQI 2.0, this EQI 2.0 provides you with a detailed assessment with respect to the emotional intelligence skills, which are critical for building relationships and teams, solving problems and typically resolving conflict, leading effectively and building resilience. So, it also provides suggested strategies for bringing your EQ competencies into balance for greater effectiveness. So, typically it measures 5 EQ composites, that is self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, then decision making and stress management to be added to the particular format. We look into, let's say, the entire emotional intelligence EQI 2.0 inventory, we see that these are the typical aspects like stress management, self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal decision making, etc. as the factors we have seen. So, you'll see that when it comes to self-perception, you have self-regard, self-actualization, emotional awareness, self-awareness, etc. as different elements. In case of self-expression, you have emotional expression, assertiveness, independence. In case of interpersonal, you have interpersonal relationship as one of the critical factor. You have empathy, you have to have social responsibility. In case of the decision making, you have the problem solving ability, the reality testing and all these impulse control, that is with respect to decision making. When you talk about the stress management, you talk about flexibility, you talk about stress tolerance, optimism. So, what I can understand from here is that emotional and social function is taken care of, well-being is taken care of, performance is also taken care of. Now, let's look into another assessment technique, that is the Mayer-Salovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, MSCEIT. This is an ability-based EQ test measuring how well individuals perceive and manage emotions. So, the MSCEIT is designed to measure the 4 branches of emotional intelligence as defined by Mayer and Salovey's model, that is perceiving emotions, facilitating thought, understanding emotions and managing emotions. So, when you look into this perceiving emotions part, please note the ability to perceive emotions in oneself and others as well as in objects, art, stories, music and other stimuli forms part of it. You look into facilitating thought, you will see the ability to generate, use and feel emotion as necessary to communicate feelings or employ them in other cognitive process typically. Then you have the understanding part, where you look into understanding emotions, the ability to understand emotional information, to understand how emotions combine and progress a relationship through relationship transitions and to appreciate such emotional meanings. And we also have managing emotions part, where it is the ability to be open to feelings and to modulate them in oneself and others so as to promote personal understanding and growth. Now, when we look into the competency based assessment, I will go with the popular tools of Wave Professional Styles. So, Wave Professional Styles Personality Questionnaire is a very good measure used in selection, development, talent management. It can be also used in succession planning, leadership programs, coaching and career planning. So, these Wave's unique 3 deep dives give remarkable insights into how we can typically explore the unusualness of individuals that comes in the facet ranges, compare motives and talents that is coming under the talent splits. Control for distortion and response faking, that is more of a normative split. So the Wave Professional Styles Expert Report is a comprehensive report that outlines an individual's response to the questionnaire. If it features a wealth of information from response style, competency potential to predicted culture, environment fit. Now let's look into the CPI 260, that is the California Psychological Inventory. This is also a well-researched and well-adapted measure where we can have a assessment of the competency based factors. So the CPI 260 personality assessment provides a distinctive view of people applying for or incumbent in leadership positions in organization. So using a sophisticated technique to extract detailed insights about someone's personality, it is able to summarize and explain how other people would see that person and how others would judge their leadership style. So in this way, it provides a unique way of leadership ability or potential that cannot be accessed by most other personality assessments. So you see, it measures work-related characteristics, it measures motivations, thinking styles using 26 individually researched trait measures. It gives feedback on how the individual measures up against almost 18 leadership competencies, showing which are their strengths and development areas. So it looks at individual motivation and current level of satisfaction. Then we move on to the Hay Group Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, which is also known as ESCI model. You look into the ESCI model developed with Daniel Goleman, measures key emotional and social intelligence competencies. So the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, ESCI, is a 360-degree survey designed to assess 12 competencies that differentiates outstanding from average performance. So since we have already gone through the 360-degree aspect, we will be able to understand this more quickly. So the ESCI measures the demonstration of individuals' behavior through their perceptions and those of their raters, making it distinct from measures of EI that assess ability or personality preferences. So we have the self-awareness, that is recognizing and understanding our own emotions captured in the competency. So emotional self-awareness. Then you have self-management, which effectively manages our own emotions. So emotional self-control, achievement orientation, positive outlook, adaptability. Then you have social awareness, typically looking into recognizing and understanding the emotion of others, empathy, organizational awareness. Then you have the relationship management, typically applying our emotional understanding in our dealings with others, influence, coach and mentor, conflict management, inspirational leadership, teamwork, etc. So this is a certain bit of bird's eye view towards Hay Group Emotional and Social Competency Inventory. We move on to the situational and value-based assessment. These explore how a leader adapts their style depending on the context, depending on values or ethical dilemmas. So the popular tools that are used are Situational Leadership 2, SL2 by Ken Blanchard. So Ken Blanchard is a name which you would have already come across in the organizational behavior course. Situational leadership specifically is a flexible leadership model created by Hersey and Blanchard. So it emphasizes that effective leadership is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Leaders should adapt their styles based on the context and readiness or development level of their team members specifically. So you look into this model, it acknowledges that the best leadership style depends on the situation and the needs of the followers. So the follower need is the vital parameter which guides this particular model. You look into this article, it will cover the history of situational leadership theory and how to get situational leadership training for your organization. So SL2 identifies 4 key leadership styles, that is it looks into directing, it looks into coaching. When you look into directing, it is of high direction, low support, used for followers with low competence and commitment. S2 would be coaching, which is high direction, moderate support, used for followers with low to moderate competence and commitment. Then you have S3, supporting, the low direction, high support, used for followers with moderate to high competence and commitment. And finally delegating, S4, that is low direction, low support, used for followers with high competence and commitment. So you see the development level of individual, there is a continuum from developing to developed, where you can see that D1 to D4, that is low competence, high commitment, going to all the way to high competence and high commitment. So this is a snapshot of the situational leadership SL2 by Ken Blanchard. Now, situational and value-based assessments, we continue. We look into the Barrett Value Center, that is yet another leadership value assessment. So it evaluates personal values, it evaluates organizational values and the leadership impact. So there are 7 levels of consciousness. 1, it starts from viability. You look into viability, it focuses on basic needs such as financial stability and health. It looks into relationship, which emphasizes interpersonal connections, trust and communication. The third factor would be performance. It centers on achieving excellence, recognition and status. It looks into evolution as the fourth parameter, which encourages, let's say, adaptability, continuous learning and innovation. Then you have alignment, typically as the fifth factor, which typically centers around the alignment possibilities with respect to the goals. Then you have collaboration, typically which looks into the effects of social responsibility, community contribution and ethical practices. And finally, you have the contribution, which is representing the selfless service, commitment to humanity and environmental sustainability altogether. So these are the typical aspects that are covered in the Barrett Value Center. So if you look into each of these factors, they have a corresponding explanation part with respect to contribution. You have, let's say, the living purpose, cultivating communities being following that, authentic expression, courageously evolving. When you talk about evolution, let's look into them one by one. Typically, when you look into the viability part, we are looking into the financial stability, we are looking into the profit, we are looking into the safety, health parameters, etc. When you look into the relationship angle, it's all about building relationships. The customer satisfaction comes here. The connection, respect, listening, open communication, all these factors do come here. Then we have achieving excellence. You look into quality, you look into result orientation, competence, self-esteem, efficiency, productivity, etc. Then you look into how we can courageously evolve, especially in case of evolution, where the aspects would be accountability that will come into picture, transformation that comes into picture, innovation, continuous learning, autonomy, empowerment, agility, etc. Then we have in alignment the authenticity of expression, that is authentic expression, which is more about openness, which is more about creativity, integrity, passion, trust, honesty, transparency, etc. Then we have the collaboration aspect with respect to cultivating communities, community involvement, partnership, mentoring, coaching, employee fulfillment, all these aspects typically come in under collaboration. And finally, contribution is all about the purpose, being of service for future generations, vision, the social responsibility, long-term perspective, etc. So this covers a holistic list of certain parameters which typically have a great sense of understanding, not only with respect to this generation but also with respect to the coming generation. So over the entire set of the assessment patterns, inventories, assessment methods, scales, whatever you call them, We have tried to look into different parameters, be it leadership, be it competency, be it personality. We have tried to underscore some of the critical assessment measures that are there. Please note, I would like to conclude this particular session with the same aspect which I have already mentioned in some of the earlier lectures. We look into goals, we go for SMART goals. We look into something which can be done in a short span of time, we go for something that can be measured. So anything that cannot be measured cannot be improved. So why there is need for assessment? Categorically, I can say that we need to improve the process. We need to have a intervention in increasing or developing the personality of the employees. We need to have an intervention to boost the leadership. We need to look into the succession pattern. We need to have young people coming into the organization, taking the top roles, making the organization a big success. We need people who are capable. We need people who are accountable. We need people who are responsible, and we need people who perform. So this can only be achieved by proper assessments. These proper assessments will only give us some results with respect to where we stand, and from those results only we can judge what are we dealing with. And once we have a clarity on what we are dealing with, then we go on for intervention mechanisms. So the whole cycle needs to be a virtuous cycle, and for this all these assessments hold a significant, a vital role in bringing out a transformational change. This is what I wanted to discuss today. Thank you for listening to me patiently. We'll come up with more details, the second part of this with respect to the diagnostic affairs in terms of learning and development in the next class. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.